Half Pint, written by David L. Tank, with illustrations by Forrest Wolford, produced and distributed by Union Pacific Railroad, narrated by Geeb Machine. Half Pint was a locomotive. He had heavy iron wheels, a strong steam boiler, and a storage bin for coal. He was just like every other steam locomotive. Well, almost like every other locomotive. Half Pint was somewhat smaller than most engines. In fact, he was so small that if he wanted, which he didn't, he could fit inside the boiler of a big steamer. He was the littlest locomotive around. As the big, powerful locomotives passed by, they would blast their loud steam whistles at Half Pint. Breep! 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 The sound could be heard for miles, but when Half Pint tried to answer, all that came out was a tiny sweet, sweet. It sounded more like a boiling tea kettle than a train. The bigger engines all laughed at Half Pint. "Hey kid, when are you gonna grow up?" they would shout as they went roaring by. Even the engineers were embarrassed to drive such a tiny locomotive. Each week they would get together and draw straws. The loser had to drive Half Pint. Being so small seemed bad enough, but Half Pint had another problem. He never got to travel. Day after day, he just moved supplies for construction workers. This time, he was helping to build a giant dam on a river in Idaho. It wasn't a bad job, but while the other engines steamed all over the country, Half Pint had to stay on one small section of track. The little engine felt very much alone. Late at night in the roundhouse, Half Pint would listen as the other engines told stories about their adventures. "I charged up a mountain so steep that even the mountain goats couldn't climb it," bragged one old engine. "I'm the strongest steamer around." "That's nothing," scoffed a big black locomotive with 16 wheels. "I've pulled trains across this whole country 100 times, maybe 200. I've traveled further than any other engine in this roundhouse." A third old boiler, bigger than the others, added, "I steamed through a snowstorm once that was so blinded my headlight wouldn't even shine to the tip of my cow catcher. I am certainly the bravest train here." Poor Half Pint couldn't add a thing. He wasn't more powerful than anyone, and the farthest he had ever traveled was to the edge of the dam and back. So he just sat quietly on his track, feeling very, very small. One day, Half Pint heard the engineers and workmen talking about going home. The dam was almost finished. "Oh boy," thought Half Pint, "I'll finally get to travel." Every day he got more and more excited. The workers packed their equipment onto flatbeds pulled by the big locomotives. But no one moved Half Pint. He began to wonder when he would leave. Then he got worried. Everyone was disappearing, and he was still at the bottom of the reservoir. All of a sudden, he heard a rushing, splashing sound. "Stop!" he cried. "You forgot me!" But there was no one left to hear. Soon the water was sloshing around Half Pint's wheels, up the sides of the coal box, and over the floor of the cab. In a short time, he was completely covered. The dam was being filled with water, and no one had even bothered to move him. Half Pint just sat there under all that water, feeling very sorry for himself. "I guess I'm even too small to bother keeping." He was not very happy. 10 years went by. 25. 50. Each summer, Half Pint could hear the buzzing of motors and the laughter of water skiers as their boats zoomed by above his head. Sometimes he wished that he were a boat. Giving people rides, hearing them laugh, and making them happy might be fun. He still wanted to get past the edge of the dam, but it had to be better than playing hotel for a school of sunfish. Time seemed to go on forever. Then, one day, an odd thing happened. It got very quiet. The boats were gone. Half Pint was puzzled. What's going on? He wondered. The usually murky water appeared to be getting lighter. It seemed to Half Pint that he was rising, getting closer to the surface of the water. He could even see the waves splashing above his cab. My wish has come true, laughed Half Pint. I'm turning into a boat. I'm beginning to float. But that was impossible. He could still feel the mud packed against his wheels. Then he realized what was really happening. The water was going away. After all those years, the dam needed to be repaired. To do that, the reservoir had to be drained. I'm free! I'm free! Shouted Half Pint as the sun shone against his boiler. It felt so warm and good that he tried to sweeten his whistle for joy. But it was full of seaweed. Look at that! Called a man from the top of the dam. There's a little train down there! The construction workers were all amazed at their discovery. Soon television cameras and reporters were there. Everyone wanted to see the little engine. Within days, a big crane pulled Half Pint out of the mud and set him on a special railroad car. At the head of the train was a bright, shiny diesel locomotive that had replaced one of the old steamers. Everything looked so different to Half Pint. Riding the train was great fun. Half Pint saw so many mountains and trees and hills and plains that he could hardly believe they were all real. The train stopped at a huge train yard with more tracks and trains and boxcars and buildings than just about anywhere. Half Pint was carefully pulled into a gigantic workshop right alongside a big new diesel. Inside, the treatment was even more special. Half Pint was cleaned and polished and greased and painted, and before long, he was as good as new. There were specially made brass lights attached to his front bumper, and a bright, shiny number 1 was placed right in front where everyone could see it. To top it off, he got a brand new whistle. Half Pint couldn't resist trying it. Sweet! Sweet! Tooted Half Pint for the first time in years. He still sounded like a tea kettle, but Half Pint didn't care. He was happy to sweet at all. Then it was back on the tracks and outside. In front of Half Pint was the biggest of all the old steamers. It had been sitting there for a long time, inside a chain-link fence. Glad to see you, called the old giant. Sweet, sweet, whistled Half Pint. Sorry I can't stay to visit, but I'm going traveling again, back to a little town by the dam. But don't worry, this time I plan to keep my cab above water. When he got back, the townspeople had a big welcome for him. There was a band and a speech, a big picnic, and even ice cream with chocolate sprinkles. Half Pint was given a special place of honor in the prettiest part of City Park. And then something happened that Half Pint never expected. The town's children all wanted to be his engineer. He was just their size. For the first time since he could remember, Half Pint loved being the littlest locomotive around. The real Half Pint. When water in the Alexander Reservoir near Soda Springs, Idaho, was lowered in 1976, workers discovered a small locomotive. It had been left by construction crews when the reservoir was built in 1924, and rested underwater for 52 years. Caked with mud and rusting, the locomotive was completely restored by Union Pacific Railroad craftsmen at the railroad's repair shops in Omaha, and then donated to the community of Soda Springs. It is proudly displayed there today in the city park. This real locomotive and its story served as the model for the very story you have just heard. The end.